Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Technical Assistance webinar, PAR 20-179, Advancing Research to Develop Improved Measures and Methods for Understanding Multimorbidity, R01 Clinical Trial Optional, and PAR 20-180, Identifying Innovative Mechanisms for Interventions that Target Multimorbidity and Its Consequences, R01 Clinical Trial Optional. My name is Jacqueline Lloyd, and I am a Senior Advisor for Prevention in the NIH Office of Disease Prevention. On this slide is what will be covered today during this webinar. After brief introductions, I will share some logistics for the webinar. You'll hear some background information for the two PARs. This will be followed by an overview of each of the funding opportunity announcements, the purpose and the scope for research for each. You'll hear about the scientific review process and the review criteria. Then you'll hear from representatives from the institute, centers, and offices that are participating on the FOAs. They will talk about their institute, center, and office research interests for the FOAs that they're assigned onto. And then we'll open it up for Q&A. Here are the names of the NIH staff that you will hear from and the institute, centers, and offices that they represent. I want to note that Dr. Melissa Green Parker, also from the Office of Disease Prevention, will moderate the Q&A for us today. I want to acknowledge those who have contributed to the success of this multifaceted effort, which includes development of the FOAs and assistance with this webinar today. Some logistics. All participants who are not presenters are muted, and you cannot mute yourselves. Please submit your questions using the chat box feature, which is in the lower right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or the little bubble in the middle of your screen. During the Q&A session, priority will be given to questions that were submitted in advance. After today's webinar, registered participants will receive an email with a link to the webinar recording, the slides, and the FAQs once they're available. And we anticipate that they'll be available within 7 to 10 days. All webinar materials will be posted on the ODP website, which is shown on this slide in the red rectangle. First, the definition of multimorbidity relevant to these PARs. Multimorbidity, also referred to as multiple chronic conditions, MCCs is what I will use going forward, is defined as the co-occurrence of two or more chronic health conditions. Multimorbidity may include physical or mental health conditions or a combination of both. The prevalence of MCCs is rising in the United States and worldwide. According to the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, which is NHAES, 60% of adults aged 20 and older in 2014 had two or more chronic conditions, an increase from 46% in 1998. The incidence of chronic conditions and multimorbidity rises exponentially with age. An estimated 2/3 of older adults have two or more chronic conditions. Certain age groups of the U.S. population experience a disproportionate burden of MCCs and health inequities that are related to these. Women, African Americans, Hispanics, and non-Hispanic whites have the highest prevalence of MCCs. Racial and ethnic minority populations also tend to experience earlier onset of MCCs compared to the majority populations. Multimorbidity, though, is not just an issue in the adult population. An estimated 1 in 15 children experience MCCs. And MCCs are common at every stage of life, challenging and resource intensive. These FOAs were informed by a Cochrane review. 18 randomized controlled trials that evaluated interventions to improve outcomes for patients with multimorbidity were evaluated. Two main types of interventions were identified: interventions to change the organization of care delivery and patient-oriented interventions. The conclusions from this review were that there was a small number of RCTs and that more are needed. The findings are mixed for intervention effectiveness. It was concluded that health outcomes for patients with multimorbidity may be improved if interventions are targeted at risk factors or specific functional difficulties. And lastly, it is difficult to improve outcomes for people with multiple chronic conditions. The FOAs were also informed by several gaps. First, there is no standard approach to measuring multimorbidity. Second, very little is known about risk factors for developing multimorbidity or the mechanisms, or the pathogenic mechanisms. And third, very little is known about how to stop the process of multimorbidity and reduce adverse consequences. These gaps suggest that multimorbidity patterns should be followed up with new research to assess possible underlying causal mechanisms. Prevention research at NIH includes studies for primary prevention, which includes promoting health, identifying risk factors for developing a new health condition and preventing the onset of a new health condition, and also secondary prevention, which includes identifying risk factors for the progression or recurrence of a health condition, detecting and preventing the progression of an asymptomatic or early stage condition. Please see the FOAs for additional inclusions. The FOAs were developed by the NIH Comorbidity Special Interest Group. This effort was coordinated by the Office of Disease Prevention in collaboration with the ICs, the institutes that are listed on this slide. I want to call your attention to the fact that the Office of Research on Women's Health and the National Institute on Child Health and Development joined the FOAs after they were published. They joined via the notices that are shown on this slide. Please see the notices for more detailed information on the research interests and participation of ORWH and NICHD. The first PAR is the Improved Measures and Methods FOA. The purpose of this PAR is to improve availability, quality, and utility of data and measures for MCCs and methods for analyzing MCC data. For this PAR, research should be designed to discover, develop, and/or evaluate MCC measures or tools that reflect the longitudinality and life course diversity of multimorbidity. This includes, but is not limited to, the topics that are listed here. Just to mention a few, measures or tools to support basic mechanistic discovery of shared MCC pathways using animal models, patient-focused studies that capture patient reports and related constructs such as functional limitations and quality of life. The participating ICs for this PAR are shown on this slide in red. General topics that are considered within scope include, but are not limited to, those that are listed on this slide. For example, identification and/or initial biological, analytical, and clinical evaluation of basic mechanisms or pathways shared by MCCs, development and/or evaluation of multimorbidity measures and methods that are appropriate for various stages of life course and racial ethnic minority groups. This is a continuation of general topics that are considered within scope for this FOA. Development of multimorbidity measures that more comprehensively capture illness severity, and use of modeling and simulations to improve multimorbidity measurement and systems of care. Now we move on to the second PAR, which is PAR 2180, Innovative Mechanisms for Interventions FOA. For this FOA, the purpose is to support identification of shared mechanisms and development of innovative interventions to address MCCs and its consequences. For this FOA, intervention research should be designed to study mechanisms or pathways to prevent MCCs, targeted therapies and management of MCCs to delay progression and prevent onset of new conditions, and innovative healthcare partnership models for managing and treating MCCs. And again, the participating institute centers and offices are shown in red on this slide. Considered within scope for this FOA are studies that make use of existing data and linkages and/or data linkages to explore new research questions that may be helpful in understanding the impact of interventions targeting prevention of one chronic health condition or related conditions, or in designing future interventions to prevent co-occurring MCCs. Topics of interest include, but are not limited to, those that are listed on this slide: Again, just to mention a couple of examples, longitudinal studies that examine MCC onset and trajectory, as well as risk factors and underlying biology, and studies of a variety of rare disease combinations in children, and epidemiological or mechanistic studies that seek to identify MCC biomarkers and or common etiologies, or to understand MCC groupings with the ultimate goal of preventing MCCs. Here are some eligibility and application information that are relevant for each of the PARs. For both PARs, R01 clinical trial optional is relevant. For both PARs, the number of awards is contingent upon NIH appropriations and sufficient number of meritorious applications. For both PARs, application budgets are not limited, but need to reflect the actual needs of the proposed project. Please note that most institutes require program approval prior to submitting an application with a budget over $500,000 in direct costs in any 1 year. Please reach out to the IC program contact if this applies to you. For both PARs, the scope of the proposed project should determine the project period. For both, the maximum project period is 5 years. And there are specific requirements pertaining to foreign components that are important to note. So we ask you to please pay careful attention to these if this applies to you. Standard due dates apply for both PARs. The first non-AIDS due date is October 5th, 2020. And the first AIDS due date is January 7th, 2021. As I turn to our next presenter, Dr. Fungai Chanetta, I want to invite you to please start entering your questions into the chat box. Dr. Chanetta. Dr. Chanetta, you need to unmute.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Hi. As I go through this, I want you to be mindful that this is only a very small part of review, and I captured what I think might be the more important aspects that you could pay attention to. You can find a more comprehensive look at what about review on the CSR website. So the scientific review process itself is a dual review system for grant applications. The first level of review covering which would be at the institute or CSR by a scientific review group for scientific merit, and then recommending level of support or duration, and no funding decisions are made at this point. The second level of review would be by the NIH Council, where they are reviewing the scientific review group review, and then recommending funding to the institutes and evaluating priorities and relevance and advices on policy. Next slide, please. So if you look at the FOA specific criteria, I encourage all of you who are thinking of applying to actually read the FOA, including the review criteria, because that will really inform you on how you need to frame your application in order to actually address the specific needs of this FOA. So what I'm going to highlight here are additional review criteria over and above the typical, because I think these ones what will make your application stand out from a normal investigator-initiated application. So for PAR 2179, there is an additional review criteria where the application is supposed to show how the program directors, co-investigators, collaborators, and others on the research team who have demonstrated experience with prevention in the designated MCCs, as well as with developing and testing measures, methods, and analytic approaches for studying the designated MCCs. Under innovation, the additional criteria would be evaluating whether the application proposes to develop or improve measures, methods, or analytic tools in true gap areas where they do not exist or where those that exist are not sufficient. Okay, so these are in addition to the typical review criteria. And then for PAR 2180, under significance, applications will be reviewed for those applications with aims to study mechanisms or pathways that prevent MCCs. Reviewers will also evaluate the explanation of how findings will contribute to advancing interventions to address multimorbidity and its consequences if the aims of the projects are achieved. Under investigators on this PAR, reviewers will also evaluate whether PIs, co-investigators, collaborators, and others on the research team have demonstrated experience with prevention and the designated MCC. Under innovation, does the application propose novel, innovative, plausible partnerships, models across health and non-health sectors and/or strategies such as mHealth or other technologies for preventing, assessing, managing, and treating MCCs. And finally, under approach for this PAR, reviewers will also assess whether appropriate stakeholders, partners relevant to the populations to be included in the research and the sector settings where the research is to be conducted are included in the project, and if there is clear indication of their support. And by clear indication of support, most of the time, there should be a letter of support that outlines the support that is being provided on this application by these stakeholders. Next slide, please. So there are also additional review criteria. Study timeline, if it's a clinical trial, protections for human subjects. Please be mindful to make sure that you are indicating a complete human subject section, because this is one part where most applications fall short. Inclusions of women and minorities and individuals across the lifespan is not really just number counting. It's really to show that there's a scientific rationale for the exclusions or exclusions. Resubmissions and renewals and revisions for resubmission, or there will not be any resubmissions, but for the next iteration. And then there will be additional review criteria such as select agents and research sharing plans, authentications of key biological variables, in budget and period of support, being mindful that budget and period of support really doesn't factor into the overall impact score. Next slide, please. So during the scientific review process, all applications are assigned 3 to 4 reviewers. Most of the time it's 3 reviewers and 4 reviewers if there's expertise that is unique to this application that is not otherwise on the that's required in addition to the normal 3 reviewers. When we receive a preliminary overall impact score, we also provide, the reviewers also provide 5 criterion scores in addition to the preliminary score. And so what we do is we look at the preliminary scores and we average those for all of the reviewers, and the applications in the top 50% of the group are discussed. Applications receive a summary statement that include critiques from assigned reviewers and individual criterion scores. So all of the applications that are reviewed. Now, when applications are discussed, those that are in the top 50%, the summary statement will also include an overall impact priority score, as well as a summary of discussion and budget and recommendations. So they have, Center for Scientific Review is really trying to stay at the top of the field in making sure that emerging science is included in study sections and referral is done appropriately in accordance with emerging science. So we conduct evaluating panel quality in review, the acquire process. And this process is occurred for study section in the Division of Population Sciences. That includes most of the study sections that will be reviewing these applications. So if you would like to see the new referral guidelines and the new study sections that were formed as a result of recommendations from this process, there's this link here that would describe the process and the new review criteria for the study sections that were duly formed as a result of the recommendations of the process. There is also the Scientific Review Assisted Referral Tool, and this tool is really for advisory purposes only, and it's helpful to PIs to look at this tool and determine which study section they may request, being mindful that this is only a request that is honored only if the referral guidelines are consistent with the approaches that are proposed in the application. The final assignment is done by the Division of Receipt and Referral based on the guidelines for each study section. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Chinesta. Now you will hear from each of the Institute, Center, and Office representatives who will talk about their specific research interests and priorities for these PARs.
Hello, I'm Margaret Grishas. I'm the Director of Clinical Research and Epidemiology Program at NIDCR, and I'm the Program Official on this FOA, PAR 2179. NIDCR is interested in improving dental, oral, and craniofacial health. For this FOA, NIDCR is interested in research that improves measures and methods of evaluating oral disease within the context of multiple morbidity. So examples include but are not limited to the following. NIDCR is interested in expanding knowledge of shared pathways between MCCs and oral, dental, and craniofacial diseases. We are interested in research designed to develop or evaluate multiple morbidity progression and severity that include measures and methods assessing oral, dental, and craniofacial diseases. NIDCR is interested in research investigating multi-morbidity measures and methods to better understand the impact of multiple morbidity on dental, oral, and craniofacial disease. We are interested in studies encompassing the various stages of life course, different geographic areas, and racial ethnic groups. If you'd like to contact me for individual questions, my email is on the slide, and it's also listed on the FOA. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tracy King. I'm a medical officer in the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, or NICHD. We are participating in both funding opportunities, and our interests, as has been noted previously during this webinar, are described in detail in the two notices listed here, not in the main program announcements. NICHD's priorities for our participation in these funding opportunities are listed here. Applications responsive to the 2020 NICHD strategic plan, applications specific to NICHD priority populations, and those are listed here. Infants, children, and adolescents, individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, individuals with specific learning disorders, individuals with physical disabilities, and pregnant, lactating, and postpartum women. And for all of these priority populations, this includes members of racially, ethnically diverse, sexual minority, and underserved or low resources communities. Of note, NICHD will not support projects that are applicable only to a single group of related conditions or a single organ system. For funding opportunity PAR 2179, our areas of interest are listed here. We are interested in a number of approaches to the measurement of MCCs, including measures that draw from multiple sources and multiple respondents, studies that delineate similarities and differences between self-report, parent or caregiver report, and parent or caregiver proxy report. We're interested in measures that are sensitive to change over time and developmental stages, methods to assess young adult and midlife outcomes of MCCs in childhood, and methods for capturing the impact of MCCs on the health outcomes of closely intertwined other persons. Examples of this include impact of MCCs in pregnant women on their offspring, impacts of MCCs in parents on their children, and in MCCs, the impact of MCCs in children on parents, caregivers, and siblings, with the exception of the impact of MCCs in children on stress and mental health outcomes of their parents and caregivers, which is already well documented. And NICHD's topic areas of interest for this funding opportunity include the following: maternal morbidity and mortality among women with MCCs, transition of adolescents with MCCs to adulthood, and outcomes of MCCs emanating from multiple organ dysfunction syndrome, or MODS, in childhood. Of note, NICHD will not support efficacy or effectiveness clinical trials through this particular funding opportunity. For PAR 2180, these are our areas of interest. For mechanisms, we have a particular interest in polypharmacy in NICHD priority populations with MCCs, and this includes pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic medication interactions among individuals who are prescribed multiple medications for their MCCs. For interventions, our areas of interest are interventions to prevent or mitigate the impact of MCCs on maternal morbidity and mortality, interventions to improve transition of adolescents with MCCs to adulthood, and interventions to prevent or mitigate MCCs emanating from multiple organ dysfunction syndrome in childhood. Of note, any intervention study that is submitted to NICHD must use outcome measures that have been shown to be valid in the target population being studied. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Brian Kim, and I'm a program director at the National Cancer Institute and NCI's scientific research contact under these FOAs. For funding an opportunity PAR 2179, NCI is interested in measurement and methods research to understand and promote primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention of multimorbidity for cancer survivors and the prevention of cancer among those diagnosed with other chronic conditions. NCI is interested in project applications that aim to improve existing measures, methodologies, or to develop and test novel techniques and models that can include preclinical animal models and our applications of cancer-related multimorbidity. Shown in this slide are some of NCI's research interest areas, such as identifying mechanisms responsible for inverse cancer comorbidities with a long-term goal of improving cancer prevention strategies, and developing and validating methods to manage patient-reported symptoms or functional deficits that can be attributed to more than one chronic condition. For a more detailed list of research examples, please visit the FOA URL. Next slide, please. For funding announcement PAR 2180, NCI seeks to support observational and interventional research to develop, test, and implement preventive and accommodative strategies to reduce adverse health outcomes and improve the quality of care for those living with cancer and other chronic conditions. Some of NCI's research interest areas under this FOA are understanding the context for and the dynamics of patient-provider decision-making for cancer treatment and follow-up care in the context of multimorbidity, development of interventions to prevent the emergence of multimorbidity associated with cancer treatment. To view more research examples, please visit the FOA URL. In general, NCI strongly encourages research applications in underserved and understudied populations. For example, those differentiated by race, ethnicity, sexual and gender identity, age, including pediatric, adolescent, young adult, and those 65 years and older, geographic catchment areas, disability and/or disadvantaged backgrounds. For any specific inquiries, please feel free to contact me at brian.kim@nih.gov. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Marcel Salih from the Geriatrics branch of the National Institute on Aging, and I'm here to discuss our participation in these two FOAs. The NIA has a long interest in multimorbidity and multiple chronic conditions, and this is one more step in that direction. We are, for the measurement FOA, interested in mostly in studies of multimorbidity in middle life and older ages. And we are also interested in potentially animal model studies of multimorbidity, such as proof of concept studies. This list lists some of our interests in this area, but it's not limited to these areas. I just want to highlight them for your consideration. We're particularly interested in expansion of single disease-focused prospective and interventional studies of dominant conditions to include the assessment of multimorbidity. We're interested in novel multimorbidity measures that incorporate geriatric syndromes such as cognitive impairment, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. We are interested in longitudinal studies that examine chronic condition onset and trajectory, and we are interested in development and evaluation of tools which enhance the application of multimorbidity measurement and care management in primary care settings. As I said, we are also interested in the proof of concept studies using animal models for multiple chronic conditions, studies with human tissue, biofluids, or imaging samples to confirm the MCC biomarker signatures. Next slide. For the second FOA, we recognize that sometimes you can need to do observational studies to measure, to develop multi-morbidity interventions before conducting an intervention study. So that's part of this FOA, the second FOA. But we are particularly interested in interventional studies focusing on prevention of multimorbidity in adults in midlife and at older ages. Particular interests, again, are highlighted here, but this is not a comprehensive list. We have other interests, and I'd be happy to discuss those offline. We are interested in the evaluation of beneficial and adverse outcomes from differing prevention strategies for multiple chronic conditions, for testing an intervention, or for coordinating several interventions. We are particularly interested in the evaluation of person-centered approaches to prevention strategies for multiple chronic conditions, and particularly prevention strategies that focus on preventing 3 or more chronic conditions. Mechanistically, we are quite interested in the discovery of biological pathways focused on preventing or reducing common risk factors shared by MCCs in the aging population. My contact information is here, and I'm happy to work offline with people on discussing their aims. Thank you.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly King, and I want to thank Drs. Lloyd and Green Parker and the rest of the team that put this information session together. I'm a program officer at NIDCD, which is the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders. And I'm here today on behalf of Dr. Judith Cooper, who is our scientific point of contact for these initiatives, but we will both be available to answer questions. She was unable to join us today. Our institute covers 7 scientific mission areas, which include hearing, balance, taste, smell, voice, speech, and language, and we are signed on to both of these funding opportunities. We are interested in science that covers the lifespan from pediatric to adults, and we are particularly interested in studies of multiple morbidity in diverse, underserved, and vulnerable populations. We've listed examples in each of the FOAs of research priority areas, some of which are included on these slides, and you can get to the next slide. So for example, we have a keen interest in the intersection of cognitive function and communication disorders for both measurement and intervention development. But I also want to stress that we encourage investigator-initiated research and science in this space. So the ideas that you have, we want to hear about them. Thanks for the opportunity to highlight our mission areas as part of this initiative, and I encourage anyone who's interested in our science to review our sections of the FOAs carefully and then either be in touch with me or Judith Cooper with questions. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Della White, and I am a program officer in the clinical research branch at the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. NCCIH has interest in both of the FOAs that are being discussed today, and I encourage attendees who have questions about our interest to please contact me at my email address that will be provided on the slides. For PAR 2180, NCCIH will support research to understand the mechanisms of action through which complementary and integrative health approaches impact MCCs that impact multiple physiological systems such as the nervous system, endocrine system, and the immune system. Examples of the types of projects that we're interested in for this FOA include projects that have a focus on identifying interventions, including biobehavioral or physiological processes that are designed to enhance capacity for self-management and consideration of non-pharmacologic approaches in the prevention and management of MCCs, multi-morbidity studies that examine factors related to constructs such as adverse childhood experiences, functional status, and geriatric symptoms. Of note, NCCIH will not fund research proposing efficacy or effectiveness clinical trials through this FOA. Next slide, please. We have to go back to the previous one. One more. There we go. So for PAR 2179, NCCIH will support research to improve or develop methods, measurements, data collection, and data analyses techniques for complementary and integrative health approaches designed to prevent and or treat MCCs, again, that impact multiple physiological systems, such as the nervous system, endocrine system, or immune system. Examples of research that we're interested in include, but are not limited to, development and validation of measures relevant for assessing complementary and integrative health approaches used for MCCs in diverse populations, development or refinement of biosensor or mHealth measurement approaches for real-time assessment of symptoms of MCCs, and secondary analyses of existing data and biorepositories to develop, test, and validate novel data analytic methodologies. Again, NCCIH will not fund research proposing efficacy or effectiveness clinical trials through this FOA.
Hello, my name is Rajashree Roy, and I am the Program Officer for Office of Research on Women's Health, and I am also the Program Officer for this notice. If you have any questions, please give me a call. YWH signed on and published a notice number OD-20-150, in response to ODP funding announcement PAR-20.179. YWH encourages applications on research relevant to the health of women. Potential research topics include projects proposing to develop intervention to reduce multimorbidities among understudied, underrepresented, and underreported women with co-occurrence of cardiovascular disease, gynecologic pain syndromes, diabetes mellitus, chronic lung disease, or obesity. Descriptive studies using quantitative and qualitative methods to expand understanding of differences in chronic morbidity. We are also interested in research exploring secondary data analysis aimed at the discovery of new phenotypes or new mechanisms to assess known phenotypic characteristics in females or males and its relationship to disease etiology and impact on overall morbidity. YWH also signed on and interested to, this is the second one, I guess, yes. So we also signed on and published another notice. The notice number is OD-20-151 in response to the ODP funding announcement PAR-20-180. YWH encourages applications to examine the role of sex and gender in pathways to multiple morbidities. Research studying the mechanisms of multimorbidity through heritable influences. Conducting multidisciplinary studies that advance integrative sex phenotyping to guide translational research questions of MCCs and create more innovative and precise use of existing therapeutic tools. Applications are welcomed that conducting longitudinal studies of normative development on multiple chronic morbidities in special populations of women, such as racial and ethnic minority women residing in rural or underserved urban areas, migrant and immigrant people, women who are experiencing homelessness or living in overcrowded, congregated housing, or involved with the criminal system. Please see the NOSI for further information, and you have my phone number here and also my email address. So if you have any questions, please give me a call. Thank you.
Hi, this is Belinda Sims from the National Institute on Drug Abuse. I'm a program officer there in the Prevention Research Branch, and NIDA is participating in PAR 2180. And we encourage research on prevention of substance use-related MCCs, including studies to understand mechanisms underlying intervention effectiveness. Prevention intervention studies targeting common risk and protective factors for substance use-related MCCs across the lifespan are encouraged. Also, studies should attend to the settings and systems where interventions to prevent substance use-related MCCs will be implemented and incorporate relevant involvement of stakeholders in the research process. And below on this slide are areas of interest, but we're not limited to these specific areas. For example, novel prevention intervention studies that target risk factors for co-occurring substance use and related chronic conditions, such as co-occurring psychiatric and physical health conditions. Or studies that leverage methods for integrative data analysis of existing prevention intervention studies to examine prevention of substance use-related MCCs. And I'll stop there.
Dr. Eve Ryder, you might be on mute.
How about now? I've unmuted you. Yep, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Okay, great. My name is Eve Rader. I'm Associate Director for Prevention Research at NIMH. NIMH is participating in PAR 2180 and is interested in developmentally focused, theoretically informed research on the prevention of mental health-related multimorbidity that spans the life course. NIMH support for clinical trials research follows an experimental therapeutics approach whereby clinical trials are designed not only to test the intervention effects on outcomes of interest, but also to inform the understanding of the intervention's mechanisms of action. And you can look at the support for clinical trials at NIMH webpage for further information. Areas of interest include, but are not limited to, research aimed at identifying and intervening on common mechanisms of risk across mental health disorders, substance use disorders, and suicide, including studies testing whether intervening on common underlying risk etiological factors improves outcomes across conditions. Integrating, harmonizing existing data sets from prevention intervention trials implemented earlier in life to determine whether there are long-term effects and/or crossover effects, unanticipated beneficial effects on mental health and comorbidities, and to better understand mechanisms that might account for effects. Also, clinical trials to optimize and test scalable intervention strategies for preventing comorbidities common for youth, for example, suicide ideation and behavior, substance use, and violence. Thank you.
I'm Nathan Stinson. I'm the Director of Scientific Programs at the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities. NIMHD is interested in projects that address interventions for multimorbidities that are more prevalent in health disparities populations. Projects are encouraged to encompass multiple domains such as biological, behavioral, social, cultural, environmental, physical environment, or the healthcare system, and multi-levels. For example, individual, interpersonal, community, or societal, to effectively address multimorbidities among these health disparities populations. Key criteria for interventions are detailed in the FOA. Areas of interest include, but are not limited to, health impact assessment of existing or planned policies or programs on the prevention or management of multimorbidity, evaluation of natural experiments, programs, and policies that may affect the onset or management of multimorbidity, partnerships between health and non-health sectors to implement new interventions or expand existing ones to delay the onset or improve the management of multimorbidity, and studies of how primary care centers, including federally qualified health centers, can partner with community resources to delay the onset or improve the management of multimorbidity. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Martha Matoka, Branch Chief of the Symptom Science and Genetics and Self-Management Branch in the Division of Extramural Science Programs at the National Institute of Nursing Research. Our institute supports research that can build the scientific foundation for clinical practice, prevent disease and disability, manage and eliminate symptoms caused by illness, and enhance end-of-life and palliative care. I'd like to add that our institute is disease agnostic, and we focus on non-pharmacologic interventions. We've signed on to the one PAR, the multi-morbidity and its consequences PAR. And in the context of this FOA, some examples, but these are only examples of research areas of interest include development of efficacious and sustainable mHealth technologies that improve quality of life for individuals with multiple chronic conditions, and identifications of factors that contribute to family or caregivers' effective promotion of patient behaviors, such as adherence and self-management that lessen the impact of multiple chronic conditions.
Dr. Young-Hyman, are you on mute?
I am. I was trying to get my video up and it keeps going on and off. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Deborah Young-Hyman, and I'm representing the Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research. As a coordinating office across the NIH, the OBSSR promotes the use of behavioral change strategies as core elements to facilitate success of both biological and social science interventions and their interactions. And so we have signed on to PAR 2180, focusing on mechanisms and interventions with a focus on behavior, of course. This includes studying not only mechanisms and pathways of action, but the interactions between behavior and biology within a context of social determinants of health, and I saw something in the chat room about that kind of approach. OBSSR promotes diverse trial design and evaluation approaches to establish the feasibility and applicability of diverse designs and approaches to diverse and under-resourced population across the lifespan. And they range from community-based natural experiments to highly controlled RCTs and policy implementation. We are interested in promoting successful interventions that can be implemented and scaled up for intended populations in intended settings, thus improving potential for generalizability and reach. And the ability to aggregate such data with existing evidence is of strong interest. I should note that we do not hold grant portfolios, but do support this kind of research when deemed meritorious. And so, though you wouldn't be contacting me directly necessarily with your interest, rather ICs first, should they go forward and be deemed, as I said, meritorious, then we could become involved. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. This is Melissa Green Parker, and I am a scientific advisor within the NIH Office of Disease Prevention. Because the IC-specific topics discussed here today are relevant to prevention across NIH, the NIH Office of Disease Prevention is very interested in co-funding applications under these two multi-morbidity PARs. Under PAR-20-179, ODP is interested in supporting applications that include the best available and most effective methods in prevention research. Therefore, studies that show promise for improving the measurement of multimorbidity, as well as those that make use of innovative design and analytic methods, are likely to be prioritized for co-funding considerations. Next slide, please. As it relates to the innovative mechanisms or interventions FOA, PAR-20-180, ODP is interested in well-designed studies that have promise for characterizing trends in the co-occurrence of MCCs, that elucidate mechanisms for the development of co-occurring MCCs, or those that assess proven effective interventions that delay the onset of multimorbidity. Additionally, ODP encourages studies that include interventions with strong implications for disease prevention and make use of innovative design or analytical methods. Because ODP does not grant awards, again, we encourage applicants to submit applications that are very relevant to the objectives of at least one of the participating institutes and centers listed in the FOAs. Great. So now that concludes our research priorities segment, and we will now move and transition into the Q&A session where I will serve as the moderator. Your questions have been coming through the live session, and so please keep them coming. We will do our best to get to those, but I want to also provide a few reminders for this session. Participants will continue to remain muted throughout the Q&A segment. And again, submit your questions as you have been doing through the chat box that is on the right side of your screen. When appropriate, please be sure to reference a specific IC presenter, a FOA number, or a notice number so that we can ensure that your questions get addressed by the best and most appropriate individual. And some questions in the chat already have been around the slides. Perhaps you missed it earlier, but all the slides, this recording, as well as a list of frequently asked questions, all of those documents will be posted to the ODP website. The specific URL is included on this slide here in the red box. And so you will have different opportunities to revisit this information. Okay, so we did receive some questions in advance. I will start with a few of those and then move towards some of the live questions. IC presenters are just reminded to continue to check your chat box. But the first question that I'd like to pose, and perhaps Dr. King, Kelly King from NIDCD, if you are able to answer this, this would be great. The question is, how can I determine whether my research topic is a better fit for PAR-20-179 or PAR-20-180? Dr. King, if you're able to, Kelly King, if you're able to answer that, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Green-Parker. So for the two PARs, 179 and 180, they are targeting measurement and intervention development, respectively. So if you look over the topics of interest, it will probably help you figure out which of these PARs you best fit into. As an example, if you're proposing to develop an intervention for multiple chronic conditions, then PAR 180 is most appropriate. If you're doing mechanistic studies that don't involve tool development on multiple chronic conditions, then you also want to look at PAR 180. For other studies that relate to measurement or tool development for multiple chronic conditions, then you want to take a look at PAR 179, which would be the most appropriate. And again, you've heard this already, but it's really strongly recommended that you talk about your draft aims and seek input from the scientific and research contacts from the IC that you think is the best fit for your research. And all of these contacts are not only in today's presentation, but are named in each FOA under the section titled Agency Contacts.
Excellent. Thank you for that. The next question, Dr. Margie, in a DCR, if you are available to address this question. It is, if my research project is relevant to more than one NIH institute, center, or office, what information should I use to determine what is the best IC to receive my application?
Thank you, Melissa. So applicants are encouraged to reach out to each of the scientific research contacts from the participating ICs that have relevance to your research project. And you can discuss your project's fit with their IC's research priorities. The scientific research contacts are named in each FOA under Section 7, titled Agency Contacts. Now, it's important to note that most NIH offices, for example, ODP, ORWH, OBSSR, do not hold or manage grants. So these offices may consider providing co-funding support for grants that the participating institutes and centers decide to fund.
Excellent. Thank you. The next question, there are two questions that came during the live webinar, and Dr. Tracy King, I would like to pose both of these to you. I'll do them in order. The first is, are priority populations only those with physical or intellectual disabilities, or priority populations also include those with a disability like vision, hearing, or cognitive? So Dr. Tracy King from NICHD, you can answer that.
Hi, Tracy King. Yep, can you hear me? So listed in both the slides, which you guys will all have access to later, and in the notice of our participation, and I believe Dr. Lloyd's trying to show this on the screen now, we've listed our priority populations. It is not only individuals with disabilities, but it's all of those listed here. The first bullet, which says infants, children, and adolescents, includes both typically developing children and adolescents and those with disabilities. Now, sensory disabilities are a little bit of an area of overlap. So, for example, hearing impairment may be a better fit for NIDCD, and so I would encourage whoever is interested to contact the scientific contacts for both of those, and we can better guide you based on your specific research questions where it might be a better fit.
Excellent. Then there was another question, Dr. King, if you don't mind addressing this one as well.
Sure.
It says polypharmacy is a major consequence of MCCs. While multiple drugs are required for treating MCCs, there is a potential risk of adverse drug events. Is adverse drug events from polypharmacy an area of interest for these two PARs? It's not clear to me from the announcements.
That question, I'm not sure that question was specific to NICHD. I will say that polypharmacy is a specific interest. Now, in response to a different question that came through, it is not our only area of interest for PIR 2180, but it is one of our specific areas of interest. For NICHD priority populations, our interest in polypharmacy does include an interest in adverse drug events. And if that doesn't answer your question, please feel free to reach out to me by email for more information.
Thank you. The next question, I'm going to direct this to Dr. Bryan from NCI, because this may even be related to some of the live questions. But the question is, there are many potential disease combinations to be covered in the applications, and some may not investigate the same conditions. For example, investigating rheumatoid disease with depression versus investigating cancer with oral diseases. Will submitted applications be separated out by disease or condition and reviewed as a group? Will the applications be separated according to the IC or ICs of interest, or will all applications be reviewed together?
Sure. Applications will be assigned to an appropriate scientific review group on the basis of established PHS referral guidelines to the appropriate IC. Applications will be evaluated for scientific and technical merit by an appropriate scientific review group convened by the CSR in accordance with the NIH peer review policy and procedures. Prior to submitting your applications, questions regarding the scientific review process can be discussed with a scientific research contact from the participating ICs or a scientific review officer from CSR. The scientific research contacts are named in each FOA under Section 7, Agency Contacts.
Excellent, thank you. A question for our representative from CSR, Dr. Fungi Shinesta. If you're available to answer this, this would be great. The question is it best to request a particular study section? And then how do I ensure that my application is reviewed by a panel with the appropriate expertise? Dr. Fungi, can you answer that, please?
Mute. Okay, there we go. Thank you. I couldn't unmute myself. So as I indicated before, the use of the referral tool is really for benefit of the user. Ultimately, the decision on how applications will be assigned to study sections will vary depending on sometimes on the agreement with ICs, where applications could technically be clustered by FOA and reviewed together, or they could be assigned to study sections depending on the approaches and methods that are being proposed. So at this point, I really cannot answer this question because I'm not sure whether the applications responding to these FOAs will be clustered by the FOA and reviewed in special emphasis panels, or will be assigned to appropriate standing study sections depending on the subject matter being proposed. However, I think that one of the things that I always tell PIs is that be mindful that here at CSR, we see thousands and thousands of applications. So whereas you might look at a study section and really die on that hill and say my application should go there, we have a better sense based on the review guidelines of each study section where your application would be a best fit. So I think that while you can certainly request a study section, there's no guarantee that you will get it depending on all of these factors that I have just described.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Excellent answer. Next question, Dr. Della White, NICCIH. If you could provide a response to this, it would be helpful. It says, I am interested in multimorbidities and not all the ICs covering the conditions I'm investigating are participating in the FOA. For example, the National Eye Institute is not participating. How would this impact my application?
Okay, thanks for that question, Dr. Green Parker. So for the research interest and priority areas, You should be able to look in the FOA in Part 2. In Section 1, this is where all the ICs have described their research interests and priority research areas. You're also encouraged to reach out to one or more of the scientific research contacts from the participating ICs to discuss the potential impact as well as the alignment between project fit and the IC research priorities. You can find the scientific research contact name in the FOA under Section 7.
Excellent, thank you. The next question, Dr. Kim from NCI, if you don't mind taking this question. It says, this was a live one, is tobacco use or tobacco use disorders, are they considered a chronic health condition for the purposes of these FOAs?
Sure. I guess it could or could not be. I would love to get more information about the aims and approach. If the person who asked the question could just separately contact me, we can definitely have a further conversation.
Great. Thank you. The next question I'm going to pose to Dr. Nathan Stenson from NIMHD. Hopefully you're available to answer this. The question is, I am concerned I will be competing with applications that are COVID-19 related. Are multi-morbidity COVID-19 related studies included in these FOAs? Dr. Nathan.
Thanks for the question. Applications addressing multimorbidity in the context of COVID-19 will be considered responsive to these two FOAs. Applicants, though, are encouraged to reach out to one or more of the scientific research contacts at the participating ICs listed in the specific FOA of interest to discuss alignment between project fit and their IC's research priorities. The scientific research contacts are named in each FOA under Section 7, Agency Contacts. Please note that there are other NIH FOAs that specifically call for COVID-19 research. There is a particular page that will list all the active and expired funding opportunities specific to COVID-19. Furthermore, the NIH Guide for Grants and Contract, which publishes the official NIH notices of grant policy guidelines and funding opportunity announcements, also has additional information about COVID-19 possibilities.
Excellent. Thank you for answering that. Dr. Marcel from NIA, if you're available, there's a question that's probably relevant to your institute. And the question is, what are the top comorbidities in older adults that are of interest to the NIH? Dr. Marcel, answer that.
Yeah, okay. So do you mean NIH or NIA? I think, so NIH I think covers all the top comorbidities. If people want to, a good resource for older adults is the CMS Medicare Multiple Chronic Conditions Dashboard, if you want to look at that. NIA has got broad interest in all the chronic diseases, I would say, and the multimorbidity covers all the common chronic diseases. If you have such a question as a potential applicant, you're encouraged to submit that question on that kind of comorbidity question to the scientific or research contact for each FOA in that section 8. And I would suggest having a conversation or an email exchange with that person to really find out a good match, whether you're a good match with that institute or not. And for NIA, I'm the contact. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, we have a number of a few questions that Dr. Lloyd from ODP, if you're okay with answering, I will pose these questions to you. The first is, are foreign institutions eligible to apply?
Thank you for that question, Melissa. Non-domestic, non-U.S. entities, foreign institutions, are not eligible to apply. Non-domestic, non-U.S. components of U.S. organizations are not eligible to apply. Foreign components as defined in the NIH grants policy statement are allowed. If that's not clear to you, please feel free to reach out to the IC that is most relevant to the research that you have in mind for further information. Also, this is listed in one of the slides, and also in the FOAs, there's a live link to the NIH grants policy statement that would provide further clarification.
Great, thank you. Another question, Dr. Lloyd, if you don't mind. Pretty straightforward. What is the anticipated number of awards funded under each of the PARs?
Yeah, there's no set number. The number of awards is contingent upon NIH appropriations and the submission of a sufficient number of meritorious applications. So there is no set number.
Excellent. Dr. Belinda Sims from NIDA, if you're available, there's a question I'd like to pose to you. It says, since my application includes participants with multiple morbidities, what is the likelihood that two different ICs would contribute funding to my application? And is there an advantage or disadvantage for a study to have a primary and secondary sponsor? Dr. Sims, if you're able to answer that question.
Okay, sure. In terms of potential co-funding from multiple ICs for a particular project, that is a possibility depending on what the specific focus is of the research that's being proposed. When you submit your application, you should identify a primary IC assignment for your application, and if you think it has relevance to other ICs, you can indicate potential secondary assignments at the time that you submit your application. If you have questions about that, I would encourage you to contact a program official at the IC with the likely primary assignment to talk about the work that you're proposing, and you can have a discussion about potential secondary assignments if they make sense for your work.
Excellent, thank you. Dr. Tracy King, I am going to come back to you with a question that we received in advance. And it says, I'm employed by a university-based medical center in the United States, and I'm evaluating a pediatric HIV population with multiple morbidities at a foreign site. Please explain the type of acceptance of foreign sites for both FOAs, and are there special requirements I should be aware of regarding foreign pediatric populations, and where would those requirements be listed?
Hi, so thanks for the question. My answer is going to be similar to the answer that Dr. Lloyd just provided about foreign institutions. As she noted, foreign institutions are not eligible to apply. Foreign components of U.S. institutions are not eligible, but foreign components as defined by the NIH are eligible when the primary grantee is a U.S. institution. And for your specific questions about special considerations for foreign pediatric populations, It's hard to say without knowing more details, and so I would suggest, as many have mentioned on this call, that you contact scientific contact directly at one or more of the institutes that you're considering, and with more information we can provide you a more accurate answer.
And Melissa, this is Belinda Sims again from NIDA. I forgot to mention that when you list for secondary assignments, if you do list secondary assignments on your application, that does not mean the other ICs will provide co-funding. It will alert them to the fact that their IC was secondarily assigned to a particular application, and it also facilitates the part of the review process, the secondary level of review process by the various councils, but it does not commit an IC to providing any funding to a particular application.
Thank you for that additional clarification, Dr. Sims. The next question is a live question specific to NINR. So Dr. Martha, if you're available, I'd like to pose this to you. I think it's a straightforward yes or no question, but it says, thank you for the webinar, it's very helpful. I have a question regarding the NINR FOA. Does it support studies involving research activities of collecting data in China? So since we're still talking about foreign components, Dr. Martha, do you mind answering this question?
Sure. So just to make a correction, when I read the question in the chat box, the question referred to NINR FOA. I just want to remind everybody that this is a multiple institute center FOA, many institutes, centers, and offices are participating. So regarding does the FOA support studies involving research activities of collecting data in China? I think it goes back to the answer to the prior question, that if it's a non-domestic entity or a non-domestic component of a U.S. organization, you cannot apply. Certainly collecting data in China, assuming it's a U.S. institution applying, most likely that would be acceptable. It would be very helpful to see your concept ahead of time, and we can discuss this further.
Great. And Dr. Martha, while I have you, there was a previous question that came in, if I could get you to perhaps provide a response to this one as well. It says, I am currently funded to investigate methods to evaluate multiple conditions separately, and some of these currently studied conditions will be grouped into one database study. What criteria will be used to evaluate the application for overlap with current ongoing studies?
Okay, so we encourage all applicants to submit their applications that are scientifically distinct, such that there's minimal overlap to other grants that are currently being funded. In this case, or for this question, it would really be helpful if you could discuss the level of potential overlap and its potential impact on the scientific review process with the scientific contact from that participating IC that may have interest in that.
Excellent. So there are two live questions that I think I can at least provide the answers to. They have to specifically deal with who to contact for specific areas of interest. And the first one was, I would like to know whom to contact if my application is based on cancer research. Cancer research is most likely going to be aligned with interests within the National Cancer Institute. And so Dr. Brian Kim, who's on this phone, is the scientific contact for NCI, and his contact information was listed on the slide, but I'll just read his email out loud to you. The person who wrote this question, just to ensure that you have it in live time. Dr. Kim's email is byrn.kim@nih.gov. Then there was another question that I think I can also answer. This one says, I'm a senior research associate from India. I would like to know whom to contact if I would like to apply in research based on natural products from plants in chronic disease conditions. I believe this potential applicant may be conducting research that might be aligned with NCCIH. And so Dr. Della White is the contact person there. And again, once you see the slides again, you will find that the contact information for these individuals are on the slides. But Dr. White's email is della.white@nih.gov. Okay. Still checking the chat. But there's another question. So Dr. Eve, writer from NIMH, if you're available to answer this question, it says, are the applications to all ICs considered at the same importance level, or are certain medical comorbidities considered of higher priority and likely to fare better? Dr. Eve, are you available to respond?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. Great question. Applications will be selected for funding based on scientific merit, current NIH program research priorities, and availability of funds. Applicants are highly encouraged to discuss research aims from a potential application with the scientific research contacts from the participating ICs to determine alignment with programmatic research priorities. The scientific research contacts are named in each FOA under Section 7, Agency Contacts.
Excellent. Thank you for that. A live question in the chat box says, what if your application is at the intersection of disability, cancer, and race and ethnicity? What would be an appropriate agency? I'll start off with an answer, and then Dr. Nathan, or would you like to answer? It seems like this person has interest in several NIMHD priority populations, and so that would be my answer. But if Dr. Nathan, would you like to expand on that? You may be muted. But one, based on just what
this is Marcel. Maybe I should answer that.
Excellent.
So NIA is interested in disability as well as cancer, and so this one has, I think, multiple potential institutes. NCI, as you said, minority health and health disparities, NIA. So I believe the person should reach out to the scientific contacts from multiple relevant institutes and centers to figure that out. And typically what I advise people is to do that kind of outreach, and then the PI has to decide their top priority, what they want as their #1 institute, and they can put that on the cover letter when they submit the grant.
Great, thank you for that. I'm looking at our time. We have about 3 more minutes. Dr. Roy, there was a question that we received in advance. So Dr. Roy from ORWH, if you have an opportunity to answer this question, it would be great. It says, what types of pre-existing data do I need to have for my R01 application?
Sure. Generally, feasibility and pilot data are expected for R01 applications. Furthermore, special considerations might be given for early-stage investigators. Applications are strongly encouraged to speak to one or more of the scientific research contacts from the participating ICs listed in the FOA, both of these FOAs, and to discuss the potential research aims to determine that whether project fit with the programmatic research priorities and to gain an understanding about what data might be expected for a given study. The scientific research contacts are named in each FOA under the Section 7 agency contacts. I hope that's answered the question.
Awesome. Thank you very much. We are now at 1:59, and we want to honor your time. There were many questions that we didn't have an opportunity to get to, but this is where I get to say, please stay tuned. We are definitely taking inventory of everything that came in through the chat today, and so with those questions, along with the ones that we've received already, we are compiling a list and putting them in a document that will be titled Frequently Asked Questions. And so we will post the Frequently Asked Questions document along with the slides and the recording of today's webinar on the website that you see listed on the slide shown now, prevention.nih.gov/multimorbidity webinar. Because we have to go through review for compliance, 508 compliance, please allow about 10 to 14 days at least before we get these materials posted. But go continue to check this site for the slides, for the recording, and for the Frequently Asked Questions document. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Lloyd to close us out.
Thank you, Melissa, for moderating the questions and also to our presenters for responding to the questions. Thank you all for participating and for your great questions, and best wishes. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.